They told us we were born free, but freedom has a footnote, and some of us were born as the footnote itself, living proof of a crime no court ever recorded, a stain no sermon could wash away. If you listen closely to the land beneath your feet, it still remembers our names, and there are boxes buried in American basements that never held keepsakes, ledgers without covers, photographs with faces scratched out, birth certificates folded until the ink bled. I've spent years in those rooms, county archives that smell like damp paper and shame, where the truth isn't locked away. It's hidden in plain sight, disguised as genealogy. What I found wasn't a story of villains and heroes. It was a story of inheritance, not of wealth, but of silence. And in the early years of this country, sin wasn't always punished. Sometimes it was preserved, sometimes it was renamed, and sometimes it was given a child's face and told to grow up pretending nothing happened. Families learned how to survive by forgetting. Churches learned how to forgive without confessing. Courthouses learned how to file away human lives under phrases like irregular, illegitimate, or worse, phrases that followed children into adulthood like shadows that never stretched long enough to escape. And these weren't myths. They were policies, customs, agreements whispered between men who shook hands and looked away, and the children, those born as evidence, became walking reminders of a line crossed and never acknowledged. Their existence alone threatened to reopen wounds the nation decided to cauterize with time. And we like to believe the past is past, that blood forgets, but blood remembers. It remembers in the way families refuse to talk about certain rooms, in the way last names change abruptly, in the way some graves have no markers and some stories end with, "Don't ask." And tonight, we're gonna ask, not loudly, carefully, because what we uncover isn't just history, it's a mirror. And once you see what's reflected back, you don't get to claim you didn't know. And the records begin to change around the late 1700s, not suddenly, quietly. A word disappears here, a name altered there. Where a father should be listed, there's a blank. Where a mother's age should be questioned, it isn't. Historians call this inconsistency. I call it coordination. And in plantation counties, in mill towns, in church registries from New England to the Deep South, you see the same pattern repeat. Children appearing without origin stories, born into households that would never claim them publicly, but never fully let them go either, raised close enough to serve, far enough to never belong. These children were not accidents, they were outcomes, and sometimes the sin was obvious: rape, incest, coercion, ownership disguised as tradition. Other times it was subtler: a master's son and a servant girl, a preacher and a parishioner, a respected judge and a woman whose testimony would never outweigh his reputation. The law didn't need to intervene. The family already knew what to do, and they created categories: bastard, natural, mulatto ward, terms that sound administrative until you realize they were psychological cages. To be labeled was to be warned you exist, but don't ask why. You are here, but not equal. Your life is tolerated, not celebrated. And the cruelest part wasn't the poverty or the labor. It was the gaslighting. Being told from the moment you could understand words that your questions were inappropriate. That curiosity was disrespect. That survival required gratitude. Imagine growing up, knowing your very body confirms something unspeakable, while everyone around you insists nothing ever happened. And this wasn't just happening in one region. It wasn't confined to one race, one religion, or one century. Wherever power met secrecy, children became evidence. And evidence, when inconvenient, must be controlled. And families mastered the art of containment, sending children away for schooling, taking them out of charity, rewriting family Bibles years later. By the time these children grew old enough to suspect the truth, the witnesses were dead, the paper trails sanitized, and the silence inherited by the next generation. And history didn't forget them. It buried them alive. And by the mid-1800s, the system was perfected, not written into law but practiced with precision. Communities knew which children not to look at too closely, which faces carried resemblance that made people uncomfortable, which questions were met with a hand on the shoulder and a warning tone. And these children grew up inside contradictions, fed by the same kitchens, disciplined by the same men, prayed over by the same churches that denied their legitimacy. They learned early how to read a room, how to disappear without leaving, how to make themselves useful enough to keep, but invisible enough to survive. And some were given new surnames, usually common ones: Smith, Brown, Carter, names designed to erase lineage. Others kept the family name but were never allowed to speak it loudly. A last name without inheritance is just a leash with letters on it. It tells you where you belong and exactly how far you're allowed to go. And psychological damage doesn't always announce itself as madness. Sometimes it looks like obedience, hyper-awareness, a lifelong urge to earn permission to exist. Many of these children became the most reliable workers, the quietest soldiers, the most loyal sons who were never fully sons at all. America praised their resilience without ever acknowledging what broke them in the first place. And then when they had children of their own, the curse didn't end. It adapted. Trauma doesn't need a storyteller. It passes through tone, through discipline, through what is never said at the dinner table. A father who never felt claimed struggles to claim his own. A mother raised as a secret teaches her children how to shrink, and generations later, descendants still feel it. The unexplainable shame, the sense of being out of place even at family gatherings. The gut-level certainty that something is wrong, but no proof to point at. That's how well the system worked. It didn't just hide the sin. It outsourced the burden of carrying it, and America built itself on visible monuments. But its true architecture lives inside families, in what they conceal, in what they normalize, in what they convince themselves was necessary. And these children were never meant to be remembered, only managed. But forgetting leaves traces, and traces always lead back to the crime. And the most disturbing part isn't what was done, it's how normal it became. By the early 20th century, the descendants of those original sins were sitting at town councils, running businesses, leading congregations. Respectable men with clean hands and dirty foundations. The past wasn't haunting them anymore. It was working for them, and you can see it in the photographs. Group portraits where one face is cropped out later. Family trees with branches that stop abruptly, as if the blood simply chose not to continue. Letters where pronouns replace names. The child. That situation. Language designed to disinfect memory, and then came the institutions that finished the job. Orphanages that asked fewer questions than they should have. Schools that trained obedience, not curiosity. Asylums for those who asked the wrong questions too loudly. If a child carried too much resemblance, too much rage, too much truth, there were places to put them where records grew thin and voices disappeared. And this is where the horror deepens. Because the nation didn't just tolerate these practices, it rewarded them. Families who managed their secrets well were seen as stable. Communities that kept scandals quiet were seen as moral. Silence became a civic virtue. And the children, now adults, learned that survival depended on protecting the very structures that erased them. And some tried to break the pattern. They wrote letters. They confronted elders. They asked pastors, judges, mothers on their deathbeds. And occasionally, someone cracked. A whispered confession, a sentence that began with, "You didn't hear this from me." But truth, revealed too late, doesn't heal. It corrodes. And what do you do when you realize your existence solved a problem for someone else? When your life was the compromise that kept reputations intact and bloodlines pure? That knowledge doesn't fade, it metastasizes. And this is why so many American families feel haunted without believing in ghosts. The past isn't behind them, it's inside them. Waiting, patient, undeniable. And then the closer we get to the present, the harder it becomes to pretend this is ancient history. And by now, you may be wondering why this still matters. Why dig up bones when the living are already tired? But here's the truth buried deepest of all: the past was never finished with us. It just learned how to hide better. And today, DNA tests reopened doors families swore were sealed. A spit sample replaces a confession. A percentage replaces a name. And suddenly, people are confronting histories no one prepared them for. Brothers where cousins should be. Ancestry that contradicts the story they were raised on. Proof, undeniable and cold, that someone lied to keep a structure standing. And for some, the discovery feels like betrayal. For others, like relief. Because that lifelong sense of wrongness finally has a source. The shame that never belonged to them has a lineage. And the silence, they realize, was never protection. It was containment. And here is the hardest thing to accept. Being born as evidence of a sin you never committed doesn't make you cursed. It makes you dangerous. Because your existence threatens the lie. You are what history tried to smooth over, rename, and forget. And forgetting only works until someone remembers. And America doesn't like this conversation. It prefers triumphs, clean timelines, heroes without shadows. But real history is quieter. It lives in attics, in probate files, in the tension at reunions, in the way some elders still flinch when certain names are spoken. And if you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? And because once you know you have a choice, you can continue the silence, or you can become the first person in the line who refuses to carry a crime that was never yours. And the archive is open now, and it's looking back at us.